the fire. Today, inspire our lawmakers to unite in putting out the fire of this government shutdown that has already burned far more than anticipated. We pray in your mighty name. Amen.
Would you please join me in the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will be in a period of morning business, with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each. Senator from Iowa.
Thank you, Mr. President. On Thursday, I sounded the alarm as the lapse in government funding endangered food assistance for 42 million Americans rapidly approached. That was November 1st, the approach date. I called on Senator Schumer to end the partisanship and vote for a clean extension of government funding. 45 Democrats have opposed clean extension of funding 13 times. Republicans have voted for it 13 times. The Trump administration is putting a temporary Band-Aid on the program, tapping into emergency funds that will cover half a month of food stamps. Meanwhile, I've got Iowans calling my office, asking me where they can get food for their families. This is a sad commentary on the politics of a nation and a nation of abundance. I always say, you're only 9 meals away from a revolution. Just think, if you're a family, you got children, 3 days without any food, what action you might take if you can't properly feed them. We've seen those sorts of revolutions in other states or in other countries. So let's feed the American people with the bipartisan cooperation they deserve, and the bipartisan cooperation that has always been a part of the food stamp program. Because over decades ago, 2 famous senators, Dole and McGovern, in a bipartisan fashion, came up with the idea that why should we have people that are nutrition deficient in the United States when the federal government has warehouses full of plenty of food? So that's the basis for the food stamp program. We should continue that bipartisan cooperation. I hope the Democrats will wake up and give families a permanent solution to the government programs they rely on. Now, Mr. President, if I may continue, I want to speak about a couple judges that'll be before us this week. We'll be voting on a pair of highly qualified circuit court nominations. Despite the ongoing Democrat government shutdown, the Senate Judiciary Committee remains hard at work. We're continuing to hold hearings. We're continuing to advance strong judicial nominees like the 2 that I'm about to alert my colleagues to. The first is Joshua Dunlap for the U.S. Court of Appeals for the First Circuit. The second is Eric Tung for the U.S. Court of Appeals, Ninth Circuit. Both will make fantastic circuit judges, and I urge my colleagues to vote for them. As Maine Senator Collins detailed last week, Mr. Dunlap graduated first in his class from the University of Notre Dame Law School and then served as a clerk on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 10th Circuit. Since then, he's earned a stellar reputation as an appellate litigator throughout his decade-and-a-half tenure in the private practice of law. Mr. Dunlap noted during his confirmation hearing that, quote, Mainers, meaning residents of the state of Maine, I'll start that quote over again, Mainers are famously independent, end of quote. I'm confident that we can expect no less from him as a fair and impartial judge. Indeed, Mr. Dunlap's career demonstrates that he is a thoughtful and sharp lawyer committed to the rule of law, and is, in his own words, he believes, quote, the law should be available to all and applied fairly to every litigant, end of quote. For these reasons, he's earned widespread support, including from his law school, his co-clerks, and his law firm colleagues. I'm confident that Mr. Dunlap will make an outstanding judge on the First Circuit. I also trust he'll take great pride in serving his state and our nation. President Trump and Senator Collins made an outstanding choice in Mr. Dunlap. Eric Tung is another great selection. He completed his undergraduate degree at Yale and graduated with high honors at the University of Chicago School of Law. He clerked for Justice Scalia on the U.S. Supreme Court, and he also clerked for Justice Gorsuch, both during his tenure on the 10th Circuit and upon Justice Gorsuch's elevation to the U.S. Supreme Court. Mr. Tung was a Bristow Fellow in the Justice Department's Office of Solicitor General, where he worked on numerous cases before the nation's highest court. During President Trump's first administration, he also worked as an assistant U.S. attorney in the Central District of California. As a federal prosecutor, Mr. Tung handled a broad array of criminal matters, including firearm offenses, drug trafficking, and fraud. In recent years, Mr. Tung has focused on civil litigation and appeals in private practice. He was appointed by the Chief Justice of the California Supreme Court to serve as the sole civil appellate practitioner on the Appellate Indigent Defense Oversight Advisory Committee. In every facet, Mr. Tung has been an outstanding appellate lawyer. Based on his stellar credentials and his stellar reputation, it's no surprise that his nomination is supported by his law firm colleagues and the various co-clerks that he's worked with at the 10th Circuit and the U.S. Supreme Court. Like Mr. Dunlap, I believe Mr. Tung will make a phenomenal judge and serve this nation honorably and with distinction. So, I encourage my colleagues to support both of these fine circuit court nominees. I yield the floor. I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Without objection. Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Also Brooks.
President.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I move to proceed to calendar number 168, H.R. 5371.
The clerk will report.
Motion to proceed to calendar number 168, H.R. 5371, an act making continuing appropriations and extensions for fiscal year 2026 and for other purposes.
Mr. President, it's November. November. It's been 5 weeks since Democrats shut down the government. And once again, we start this week by asking, is this the week that Democrats end their shutdown? Mr. President, I've said it before that there are no winners in a government shutdown. There are no winners, but there are plenty of losers. Chief among them is the American people. As the senior Democrat from Virginia said just last year, and I quote, "Shutdowns aren't victimless crimes," end quote. And after 5 weeks, Mr. President, the victims of the Democrat shutdown are starting to pile up. Military families have turned to food banks in significant numbers. And they're not the only ones. Food banks in this area and around the country have seen an influx of federal workers who are missing paychecks due to the shutdown. And things are set to get much worse with SNAP running on limited emergency funds and its future uncertain. Thanks to Democrats, millions more Americans, millions, Mr. President, are now at risk of going hungry. And yet the Democrat shutdown marches on. And of course, letting Americans go hungry is just the beginning. Thanks to Democrats, Head Start programs are beginning to close. Housing assistance programs are at risk. Seniors and people in rural areas can't access telehealth services. National Guard training is on hold. Veterans programs are on pause. I'm sorry to say I could go on. Actually, I could go on for a while. Shutdowns have consequences, and the pain is being felt around the country. Mr. President, last week it seemed that Democrats were beginning to acknowledge that their shutdown is having consequences. We even heard Democrats express concern that Americans were suffering. But when they were given the chance to end all of that suffering, the vast majority of Democrats in this body were perfectly willing to prolong the shutdown and the American people's pain. The vast majority of Democrats voted once again against a clean continuing resolution, the only bill on offer that could end all this suffering literally in a matter of hours. It is the only bill in the Senate that would fix every single issue I just mentioned. It would pay our troops, fund SNAP, Head Start, veterans programs, pay our staffers. 3 Democrat senators already support that clean continuing resolution, Mr. President. And the Democrat from Maine who supported the clean CR in the House said, and I quote, "There's a lot of important work to be done in Congress, none of which will be any easier if Mainers are suffering the harms of a government shutdown," end quote. The Teamsters Union and the American Federation of Government Employees, more traditionally allies of Democrats, to be frank, have called for Congress to spare the American people further pain and to pass the clean continuing resolution. And they're far from the only ones. Mr. President, it should not be this hard for a handful of Democrats to support a clean bill that simply reopens the government. It's a very straightforward proposition. It's a 24-page bill sitting right here at the Senate desk. Not a single new Republican policy, no partisan policy writers, nothing that Democrats haven't supported before on numerous occasions. It just reopens the government. And it's just 5 Democrat votes away from being sent to the President, who would sign it literally in a matter of hours. This bill is also the quickest way to get the two discussions, I should say, about health care. That is, if Democrats are serious about solving the Obamacare problem and not just interested in using it as a political issue. As I've said more times than I can count, Republicans are more than willing to have a health care discussion with Democrats. In fact, had Democrats voted to reopen the government last week, President Trump would be meeting with them this week. Unlike Democrats who want to continue papering over the unaffordability of Obamacare forevermore, Republicans have ideas for actually lowering health care costs. And lowering costs not just for Americans on Obamacare, but also for seniors, vulnerable Americans, and the majority of Americans who get their health care through their employers. And so we're ready and willing to have that discussion. But first, Democrats need to stop playing politics with people's lives and reopen the government. Mr. President, airline travel is snarled. Small businesses are suffering. Hundreds of thousands of Americans are working without pay. And now, 40 million Americans in need are at risk of losing their food stamps. So the question, Mr. President, is how long are Democrats going to continue this? Another month? 2? 3? How much suffering is enough for Democrats? Mr. President, the bill's sitting right there. We voted on it 14 times already. We'll get that opportunity to vote on it a 15th time tomorrow. And for the sake of the American people, let's hope that at least some Democrats can see their way to ending this and ending it soon. Mr. President, I yield the floor. I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks.
Mr. President,
Democrat leader.
I ask unanimous consent the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
So, Mr. President, last Friday, the court spoke loudly. They spoke clearly. Donald Trump cannot block SNAP benefits and treat hungry Americans as political pawns. The stories from the weekend were shameful, sickening. People overwhelming food banks, handing out groceries in lieu of Halloween candy, teachers paying out of pocket to give their students extra food. Across America, appalling scenes were seen of people worried they wouldn't be able to feed their families and even themselves. This is appalling, and the courts did the right thing to step in to follow the law. But the Trump administration still refuses to fully comply. A few hours ago, the administration announced that it will provide only partial SNAP benefits to 42 million Americans facing food insecurity, even though the courts affirmed that the USDA has the transfer authority to ensure everyone can receive full benefits. Everyone can get full benefits. The only person standing in the way is Donald Trump. Donald Trump. Even after the courts have spoken, the administration continues to use kids, seniors, disabled Americans, and working parents as political pawns, dangling the threat of hunger over their heads. Providing partial benefits is not enough, is not compliant with the law, and it's particularly cruel of Trump with the Thanksgiving season around the corner. Let me say this, providing partial SNAP benefits is a floor and cannot be a ceiling. Let me repeat, providing partial SNAP benefits is a floor, not a ceiling. The administration must do more, and the courts should do everything they can to force this administration, cruel as it may be, manipulating hungry people as it is doing. The courts must make sure that full benefits are restored. Only Trump is standing in the way. On open enrollment, Mr. President, it was a bitter, stressful weekend for millions of Americans, but you'd never guess it listening to Donald Trump. Let's start with open enrollment, which began Saturday. If you look at the papers this weekend, the phrase that everyone used was sticker shock. Sticker shock. While Donald Trump is bragging about remodeling bathrooms at the White House, Americans are panicking about how they will afford health care next year. I read an article from ABC News that interviewed a photographer from Utah who gets her health care through ACA. She will go from paying $495 a month, already outrageous, to $2,100 a month, an increase more than 4 times. It's more than a mortgage. And that is Donald Trump's America. Americans pay more for health care than they do on their mortgage. It's outrageous, and it just puts an anchor around the financial anchor around the ankles of every family. And what is Donald Trump doing in the middle of all this, this horrible sticker shock crisis that people are just feeling so awful about? Well, if you watched Donald Trump this weekend on 60 Minutes, you saw a president utterly dismissive of the pain his policies have caused working people. While people are paying more for everyday expenses, Donald Trump went on TV to insist that everything is fine. He claimed yet again that we have no inflation in this country. The only problem, that's a lie. Trump, talk to the average American and tell them they have no inflation as they're paying more for everything. Particularly this weekend, they learned how much more they're paying for health care. And inflation has accelerated, actually accelerated, since the start of Trump's trade war. Donald Trump also celebrated that grocery prices are going down. Which grocery store does he shop in? Probably none. But when Donald Trump celebrates that grocery prices are going down, it's a surprise to people who actually shop at grocery stores, because they're seeing prices go up and up and up. And when Donald Trump was asked what he's doing to end the shutdown, He said his usual nonsense, it's the other side's fault, utterly ridiculous. Donald Trump is the president. People look to him to negotiate, to fix problems. Finally, I will note this. Donald Trump was also asked several times what his plan is for fixing health care. And what was his answer? Pure gibberish, because he doesn't have a plan for health care. The only plan Republicans have for health care seems to be to eliminate it, and then to tell working people to go figure it out on their own. That's not a health care plan. That's cruel. But it's what Republicans have tried to do with health care for decades. We all remember the moment when John McCain rebuked his party to preserve it. Democrats have been very clear from the start. We need to lower people's health care costs. We need to reopen the government. We need to extend the ACA premium credits. That is what a majority of Americans want. Now on Omer Nutra, my late constituent from New York. Today is a bittersweet day of heartbreak and of relief. 2 deeply anguishing years after Hamas brutally murdered Nutra on October 7th. Finally, Omer Nutra's remains have been returned to Israel. Omer was a proud New Yorker, a Long Islander, a constituent of mine. I've met with his family many, many times since October 7th, and I've been so inspired by their courage, their strength, their resolve. Nothing will ever reverse the pain of losing their beloved son. Nothing will erase that pain. But after long last, Omer can now be laid to rest in a proper burial. May his memory be a blessing. Still today, the remains of 8 more hostages murdered by the brutal Hamas remain in captivity, including that of another New Yorker, Itai Chen. We will never stop working until every last hostage is home. I yield the floor.
Democratic Whip.
Mr. President, last week I came to the floor on Wednesday to tell the story of some high school kids in Chicago. They did a remarkable thing last Tuesday, 6 days ago. These kids live in a neighborhood known as Little Village, and they go to high school there, to some well-respected high schools, Little Village, Lawndale high schools. They decided on Tuesday to stage a parade in Little Village to protest what ICE is doing to that community and to the city of Chicago. It was peaceful, it was constructive. They marched several blocks, carried copies of the Constitution with them, American flags, Mexican flags, signs that they had prepared. I remember one, I'm going to misstate exactly what it said, but it basically said, our parents have done so much to protect us, now we're going to do everything we can to protect them. I went on Friday to meet with these students. Turned out they were all girls, all women, Latina students. Some reason or another, the boys didn't get into the organization, though they did participate in the parade. These young women, about 15 of them, sat with me in a room and we talked for over an hour about their deepest personal and emotional feelings about what was happening to their families and what they did to stage this parade. Mr. President, I've been to a lot of meetings with a lot of so-called experts on this country and its future. But I learned more in that hour at that high school with those girls, those young women, than in many of those other meetings. They knew exactly what they were doing was dangerous. Their parents had warned them not to stage a parade because the ICE agents had been in the neighborhood in the previous 2 weeks. But they were determined to do something and say something. Most of them were in tears as they talked to me about what they felt personally about this experience. One of the leaders said, I'm an American. I was born here. I love this country and I want to be part of it. Look what it's doing to our families. And another young woman broke down when she said that right before the parade happened, her father had been detained. She said in tears over and over again, my father is not a criminal. Her father's been involved for 7 years to try to get his citizenship status cleared up. He's been back and forth in court. He was in the process of doing this when he was detained and has been spirited off somewhere we don't know. I thought of that experience and what those young girls had been through. And I thought about the courage they showed, their love of this country, their determination to be part of it, but their love of their family and their willingness to risk everything for their parents. That's the reality of life in Chicago and many neighborhoods today. When President Trump announced publicly that he was going to send in the military if necessary, but the ICE forces to go through Chicago, he said he was looking for rapists and murderers and terrorists and the criminally insane. He says it over and over again. Well, guess who he's arresting? Guess who they're detaining? They have yet to report one rapist, murderer, terrorist. They're taking people, they're taking the man that sells the tamales on the corner. I'm not kidding. A man who, for 75-year-old man, who sells what they call elote, which are corn cobs that they steam and are very popular in the community. Rapists, murderers, terrorists, criminally insane? No. Some of them are clearly out of status in their citizenship papers. Some are American citizens. Of all the people that they've arrested and detained, 70% of them have no criminal record, and yet they're being harassed. And they picked the weekend to do that, this last weekend, which is so special to so many American families. I think if I had to pin my wife down on her favorite holiday, it would be Halloween. She loves it. She gets these big bowls of candy, and the kids come from everywhere in our neighborhood in Springfield. And they did just this last Friday. I'm sure many of us had a similar experience. The kids are so excited to get free candy and show off their costumes, and she greets every one of them like they're her grandkids. It's a personal thing. We were worried about this last Halloween weekend in Chicago because of the ICE forces that were roaming the streets. Governor Pritzker asked for a special favor. He asked the ICE agents to take off Halloween night, spare the kids. Don't make them worry about whether they go out for candy, whether somebody's going to be arrested. I joined him in that plea. I thought it was common sense. You know what happened? Kristi Noem, who is the Secretary of DHS, said, by no way, by no means, we're going out if necessary. And they did. The ICE agents went to Evanston, which is a town just north of the city of Chicago, and an incident occurred there which was incredible. The ICE agents were roaming through the town looking for landscape workers. Well, guess what's going on? Those landscape workers are raking leaves. and they're doing their work that they do every year. We count on them to do. And this year, ICE was going to arrest them, and they did. Terrible things happened, too. There's a long story. I ask unanimous consent that this story from the Chicago Tribune be entered into the record at this point. Thank you, Mr. President. When you read this article, you realize what is happening here. These ICE agents, whom Kristi Noem calls her dream team, have completely ignored the Constitution when it comes to due process. They are snatching up people right and left. Who are their targets? The Hispanic population, for sure, or anyone who looks Hispanic, or anyone who lives in a Hispanic neighborhood, or anyone who stands on a street corner with a whistle to try to warn off people that the ICE agents are coming. And certainly those who are in the occupations normally filled by immigrants, like landscape workers. Those are the targets. This is a racist effort. I use that word advisedly. It is a racist effort. It is not about terrorists and murderers and rapists. It's about people with an accent, people who look like they're Hispanic. Well, that's what happened in the city of Evanston. And as their vans, unmarked vans, roam through the neighborhoods, these masked secret police of the efforts in the immigration agencies were roaming through the neighborhoods looking for anyone who appeared to be Spanish. And that's what they did. I want to read a statement. They pulled over a man, certainly not Spanish. His name is Morgan Krupinski, part of the great Polish population of the city of Chicago. Listen to what he had to say after he watched the ICE agents go through his neighborhood in Skokie. Skokie resident Morgan Krupinski said 2 workers from an American company were detained. The Scottish Plumber is the name of the company, were doing flood control work on his property in the 8300 block of Harding Avenue when federal agents' vehicles came down the residential street. The agents stopped and demanded documents from both workers, who were able to produce evidence that they were in fact U.S. citizens. I'm angry, said Krupinski, who identified himself as a Republican and a conservative. As someone who believes in the Constitution, he said, for someone to be stopped by federal agents because of the color of their skin and their appearance, and to be asked for papers is completely unimaginable and completely unconstitutional. Because where is probable cause? Where is reasonable search and seizure? They're working in a residential neighborhood. And then he said, as someone who voted for this president, I didn't vote for this. I didn't vote for people to be harassed. I didn't vote for people to be brought out at gunpoint with machine guns and to harass Americans. That's in the article that I put in the record. So I say to my Republican friends, if you think you're winning in the popular vote with this approach, think twice. This is not American. This is not necessary. This is intimidation. An intimidation felt by a high school in a little village in Chicago, an intimidation felt by a suburb north of Chicago, which is not usually characterized as Hispanic in nature. But they were going after the workers who were raking the leaves. It's really an amazing experience, historical experience, constitutional experience that we're facing. And it's one that we won't soon forget. And as I reflect on going back every weekend and seeing further evidence of this travesty, I think, bottom line, there are good stories coming out of this as well. Neighbors who finally gather together with their neighbors in the neighborhood and stand up for those who are being harassed by ICE and its agencies. There's another thing that's going on too, Mr. President, that seems to be totally unrelated, but I want to call it out. If you're looking for a kosher delicatessen in Chicago, let me tell you my favorite, Manny's. It's right off Roosevelt Road in downtown Chicago. The Raskin family's owned this deli for many years, 80 in fact. And Danny Raskin, grandson of the founder of the delicatessen, is running it today. He's a wonderful young businessman. He's struggling with the impact of the trade war and the impact of increasing costs for the basic products he sells. But you won't find a better pastrami sandwich or corned beef or latke or kreplach soup anywhere in America. Danny's is one of the best. Why do I bring in this advertisement for Danny Raskin? I want to tell you why. Manny's Deli, located right by the University of Illinois at Chicago, has been a legend in the community for 8 decades. If you walk into Manny's, you'll see a microcosm of the city of Chicago. People from everywhere, every kind of background, joined together over a fondness for his hearty portions and delicious sandwiches. Manny's has been a staple of this community, and today they announced they will provide free meals for those on SNAP. Free meals. Why has Manny's found it necessary to feed those on SNAP? Because President Trump became the first president in history to deliberately disrupt the processing of November SNAP benefits, jeopardizing 42 million Americans' food security. Although the Department of Agriculture was told by 2 federal courts that they had the authority to fully fund SNAP, today they announced they'll only pay half of November benefits. That is going to cause a real hardship to the millions of Americans who count on what used to be known as the food stamp program. Thankfully, Manny's Delicatessen in Chicago is willing to do what the Trump administration is not, working to make sure that nobody in their city goes hungry. They're going to offer a sandwich, a potato pancake, and some dessert to these people who come in with SNAP cards. I'm grateful to the great staff at Manny's and their owner, Danny Raskin, for their generosity as SNAP payments are cut under President Trump. And Manny's isn't the only restaurant in the city of Chicago helping those on SNAP. It's one among many stepping up across Chicago to make sure that Illinoisans don't go hungry. Taza Italian Ristorante, Wooden Paddle, and one of the better pizza places, Lou Malnati's, other restaurants as well, are offering SNAP recipients free or discounted lunch during the month of November. I'm grateful for their assistance as Chicagoans face the reality of President Trump's cruel SNAP cuts. And I hope we here in Washington will learn from the kindness demonstrated by these restaurants and that they will work as hard as they do to feed and keep America safe. Let me just add in closing, there's another man involved in this story, and I want to mention his name. It's Wayne Gordon. Wayne Gordon was a minister of Lawndale Christian Church for over 40 years. He graduated from Wheaton College, went into the ministry after he had coached basketball at Farragut High School, and started the church in the Lawndale section, a poor, largely black section of Chicago. But he and his wife moved there 40 years ago and still live there to this day. They started Lawndale Christian. He is an evangelical minister who prays for me every day, thank goodness, and I try to return the favor. But I'm sure he was the mentor that Danny Raskin mentioned as his inspiration for providing this food. Hats off to Coach Wayne Gordon and Danny Raskin for this amazing display of caring at a time when it's needed more than ever. Let me close by saying this, Mr. President. We can solve this problem in the Senate, and we can do it this week. There is no excuse. The President is back from his trip overseas. The House can be called into session in return, and they should be, sooner rather than later. And we can sit down and work out the problem of what to do with skyrocketing health insurance premiums. Let me tell you what I've been told by the Illinois Department of Insurance. They told me that hospital insurance premiums are going to double in the northern part of our state near Chicago and triple in the rural small town sections downstate. Triple the current level of health insurance premiums. How in the world will a family struggling to get by paycheck to paycheck manage that? That's a legitimate question. My Republican friends should join me in asking that question. And they should go beyond these vague references the President made last night on 60 Minutes about we have some ideas. I've heard that for years now, and we don't know what those ideas are. What we should do is sit down and work together to solve both problems. Open up the government, which we can do when we reach an agreement, and we can, of going forward on health costs that are going to make 24 million Americans lose their health insurance. We all should share feelings about the families that are struggling with this, both things, and we can do it if we work together. Drop the fanfare, close the door, find a table, invite the President and the leaders, Republican and Democrat, get it done this week. We can do it. I believe we can if we have the will to do it. I hope some people will step up on the other side of the aisle and join in this bipartisan effort. It's the only way to end this government shutdown. I yield the floor.
President.
Senator from Texas.
Mr. President, I'd ask unanimous consent to waive the mandatory quorum call with respect to the tongue nomination.
Without objection.
Mr. President, we are now over a month into a shutdown caused by the refusal of Senate Democrats to vote for a short-term stopgap spending bill that expires November the 21st. So much time has passed that we're now only 3 weeks out from that new deadline, even if they were to vote to pass this short-term funding bill that's passed the House of Representatives. This cannot be explained by logic or reason. This can only be explained by politics and by the Democratic leader's desire to keep his job and to survive in the next election. Because he's afraid of his own political party and that they will throw him overboard if he were to agree to a short-term stopgap spending bill, which we did 13 times when President Biden was in office. But we're also hearing that they want us to negotiate the expiring Biden COVID-era subsidies for the Obamacare exchanges. And since they want to talk about that, I would just reiterate what President Trump has said, what Speaker Johnson said, what the Majority Leader of the Senate has said. We're happy to talk about anything and everything you want to talk about once you reopen the government. But since Democrats brought it up, and since they still insist on keeping the government shut down, endangering people flying, causing enormous inconvenience, and at the International Bush Airport in Houston, there's a 3-hour wait for people to get simply through the security line at TSA. We know 42 million people have been denied access to supplemental nutrition, some of the most vulnerable people in our country. And we know federal government employees are not being paid, even though they are obviously working. I have not heard a single Senate Democrat saying, well, I'm going to withhold my pay during this shutdown, as those of us on this side of the aisle have done, including yours truly. So presumably they'd continue to get paid while everybody else is not being paid, and why enormous numbers of the most vulnerable of our population who depend on supplemental nutrition for food on the table are being denied that relief, all because they are afraid to deal with the politics associated with simply passing a short-term stopgap spending bill. But they also say they want this conversation to be about health insurance. And since they want to talk about Obamacare, I figured I would oblige them. Now, we know health insurance rates have certainly continued to go up. The Wall Street Journal recently reported that the cost of a family health insurance plan in 2025 is nearly $27,000. If you're on one of the 16 million people on the Affordable Care Act exchanges, your premium is scheduled to go up 18% next year. 18%. At the same time, if you're on an employer-provided insurance plan, premiums will go up roughly 6 or 7%. 6 or 7% versus 18%. Well, there must be a good reason for that astronomical figure for the Obamacare plans, and I plan on mentioning a few reasons why that is so. Well, employers are paying for much of the health insurance premiums for their employees, but the increased cost eats away at the budget they have to pay wages and other benefits. So employee salaries will become stagnant as employers have to pay more each year for health insurance. And for small businesses, the margin is even greater, or I say the margin should be smaller. The increased cost of health care for their employees might mean they can't offer generous raises, or might mean they can't afford to hire as many people as they previously did. So clearly, the rising costs of health care and health insurance is a problem for individuals and employers. But a fair question is, how did we get here? Well, the first place we have to look is Obamacare, popularly known as the Affordable Care Act. The fact of the matter is, it is the Unaffordable Care Act. When President Obama signed this highly controversial signature health care plan into policy, he promised that it would make health insurance affordable for the American people. In 2016, in a speech to students in Florida, President Obama said, "The Affordable Care Act has done what it was designed to do. It gave us affordable health care." Now, 15 years later, this claim has aged like spoiled milk. Since 2013, the year before Obamacare took effect, the average Obamacare enrollee faced a premium increase of 221%. That's since 2013 until today, 221% increase in the premium. This mind-boggling number is only for those who receive health coverage through the Affordable Care Act, which is, of course, as I indicate, a misnomer for the ages. Those who receive their coverage through their employer-sponsored plan were not affected by these premium hikes. As I mentioned, the Wall Street Journal said their premiums will go up roughly 6 to 7%. From 2013 to 2019, individuals buying health insurance on the private market faced 143% increases in their health care premiums. And this number does not account for all the Americans who kept their plans but faced increased premiums or less comprehensive coverage. President Obama knew, but he refused to say, that for many people, even though this new health care law claimed to make health care affordable, it did just the opposite. So what did he do? He tried to shift the blame. The claim that the Unaffordable Care Act would make health care affordable was far from President Obama's only broken promise. In a quip that was later described by a political fact-checking site as the lie of the year for 2013, President Obama said that, quote, if you like your health care plan, you can keep it. 2013, a political fact-checking site called that the lie of the year. But we know how the story has ended. By the fall of 2013, 4 million Americans received letters informing them that their then existing health care plan would be canceled. In the same 2016 speech, he said, "Now some people may say, well, I've seen my co-pays go up or my networks have changed, but these are decisions that are made by your employers. It's not because of Obamacare. They're not determined by the Affordable Care Act." Now, that was a complete and utter abdication of responsibility for the disruption that Obamacare caused. And while it may be true that they were not directly determined by the Affordable Care Act, it is because of the Affordable Care Act that people lost their coverage, and thus they could not keep the coverage they had if they wanted it. Obamacare did not make health care affordable. It created a tangled web of regulations alongside of taxpayer-funded subsidies that ultimately only led to higher costs for taxpayers and those receiving care. The only party that stood to gain the benefit from the Obamacare chaos was the health insurance companies themselves. They've enjoyed a windfall as a result of Obamacare. By now, insurance companies have figured out how to use this muddled mess, that is the Democrats' health care system, to lobby for government subsidies, including the continuation of the expiring COVID-19 era subsidies that the Biden administration imposed. They knew that Democrats would not want to be responsible for the increased premiums and lower coverage, so they threatened premium increases while lobbying Congress to give these insurance companies even more money in the form of enhanced subsidies. In 2025 alone, U.S. government health care subsidies paid directly to insurance companies totaled more than $130 billion. That's your tax dollars paid to insurance companies, $130 billion in 2025 alone. In some cases, these subsidies pay for phantom enrollees who are likely not even to know that they are covered by one of these policies. In 2024, there were approximately 12 million Affordable Care Act Marketplace enrollees who made zero medical claims, a highly unusual circumstance. 12 million, no claims. Roughly 40% of those fully subsidized by the Biden-era COVID credits made zero claims, meaning that these insurance companies received these very generous subsidies but incurred zero costs. Since 2021, the cost taxpayers have incurred to subsidize Obamacare plans has increased a staggering 150%. And many of the ones on these policies are far from the most vulnerable in our population. In 2021, when the Democrats lifted the cap on these subsidies, removing the income eligibility limit, households earning upwards of $500,000 were made eligible for taxpayer-subsidized plans. So you tell me why taxpayers should have to subsidize somebody who makes $500,000 a year and buy their health insurance policy for them. These increasingly expanded subsidies for high earners proves a point that was perhaps the only promise that Obamacare actually kept, that the Affordable Care Act was just the first step toward a taxpayer-funded health care system, a single-payer system. Back in 2016, President Obama compared his signature law to a starter home that would later be upgraded into one that would be much bigger. But based on the way the law actually worked, it's clear that expanding it is not going to make people better off, just the contrary. So here we are in 2026, and what happened? Are we living in a utopia where health care is free or suddenly affordable? Well, just the opposite. Health care is now more expensive than ever, with analysts warning that increased costs will continue to eat away at workers' paychecks. Millions of Americans have faced cancellations of their private insurance plans, while many more are facing devastating premium increases. And then there are the insurance companies who've reaped hundreds of billions of dollars in taxpayer subsidies while continuing to raise premiums on patients. I think it's safe to say, Madam President, that Obamacare was a golden promise that turned out to be almost entirely false. So when we look for a solution to rising health care costs, we should be wary of listening to the same people who sold us Obamacare on false premises, and not trust those who would prefer we continue to prop up a failed system that enriches insurance companies while leaving Americans to pick up the pieces. Madam President, I yield the floor, and I would note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Osterbrooks.
Without objection. The clerk will report the motion to invoke cloture.
Cloture motion, we, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close debate on the nomination of Eric Chunyi Tung of California to be United States Circuit Judge for the Ninth Circuit, signed by 17 senators.
By unanimous consent, the mandatory quorum call has been waived. The question is it the sense of the Senate that the debate on the nomination of Eric Chunyi Tung of California to be United States Circuit Judge for the Ninth Circuit shall be brought to a close? The yeas and nays are mandatory under the rule. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Also Brooks, Ms. Baldwin, Mr. Banks, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Bennett, Mrs. Blackburn, Mr. Blumenthal, Ms. Blunt Rochester, Mr. Booker, Mr. Bozeman. Mrs. Brett. Mr. Budd. Ms. Cantwell. Mrs. Capito. Mr. Cassidy. Ms. Collins. Mr. Coons. Mr. Cornyn. Ms. Cortez Masto. Mr. Cotton. Mr. Kramer. Mr. Crapo. Mr. Cruz. Mr. Curtis. Mr. Daines. Ms. Duckworth. Mr. Durbin. Ms. Ernst. Mr. Betterman. Mrs. Fisher. Mr. Gallego. Mrs. Gillibrand. Mr. Graham. Mr. Grassley. Mr. Haggerty. Ms. Hassan. Mr. Hawley. Mr. Heinrich. Mr. Hickenlooper. Ms. Hirono. Mr. Hoven. Mr. Husted. Mrs. Hyde-Smith. Mr. Johnson. Mr. Justice, Mr. Kane, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Kim, Mr. King, Ms. Klobuchar, Mr. Langford, Mr. Lee, Mr. Lujan, Ms. Lummis, Mr. Markey, Mr. Marshall, Mr. McConnell, Mr. McCormick, Mr. Merkley, Mrs. Moody, Mr. Moran, Mr. Moreno, Mr. Mullen, Ms. Murkowski, Mr. Murphy, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Ossoff, Mr. Padilla, Mr. Paul, Mr. Peters, Mr. Reed, Mr. Ricketts, Mr. Risch, Ms. Rosen, Mr. Rounds, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Schatz, Mr. Schiff, Mr. Schmidt, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Scott of Florida, Mr. Scott of South Carolina, Mrs. Shaheen, Mr. Sheehy, Ms. Slotkin, Ms. Smith, Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Thune, Mr. Tillis, Mr. Tuberville, Mr. Van Hollen, Mr. Warner, Mr. Warnock, Ms. Warren, Mr. Welch, Mr. Whitehouse, Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wyden, Mr. Young. Senators voting in the affirmative: Bozeman, Cassidy, Kramer, Crapo, Ernst, Fisher, Graham, Grassley, Haggerty, Husted, Hyde-Smith, Johnson, Justice, Marshall, Paul, Sullivan, Tuberville, Wicker. Mr. Moreno, aye. Senators voting in the negative: Also Brooks, Campwell, Gallego, Heinrich, Hirono, Reed, Warren, Welch. Mr. Sheehy, aye. Mr. Lujan, no. Mr. Schiff, no. Mr. Kim, no. Ms. Smith, Ms. Smith, no. Mrs. Moody, aye. Mr. Hoven, aye. Mr. Merkley, no. Mr. Langford, aye. Mr. Hickenlooper, no. Ms. Murkowski, aye. Mr. Banks, aye. Mr. Wyden, no. Ms. Collins, aye. Ms. Lummis, aye. Mr. Kennedy, aye. Mr. Fetterman, no. Mr. Padilla, no. Ms. Duckworth, no. Mr. Young, aye. Mr. Scott of Florida, aye. Mr. Curtis, aye. Mr. Kane, no. Mr. Rounds, aye. Mr. Budd, aye. Mr. Bennett, no. Mr. Lee, aye. Mr. Ricketts, aye. Ms. Cortez Masto, no. Mr. Coons, no. Mrs. Britt, aye. Mr. Moran, aye. Mr. McCormick, aye. Mrs. Blackburn, aye. Mr. Mullen, aye. Mr. Barrasso, aye. Mr. Cornyn, aye. Mr. Daines, aye. Mrs. Capito, aye. Mr. Scott of South Carolina, aye. Mr. Hawley, aye. Mr. Thune, aye. Mr. McConnell, aye. Mr. Warnock, no. Mr. Schmidt, aye. Mr. Risch, aye. Ms. Slotkin, no. Mr. Van Hollen, no. Ms. Blunt Rochester, no. Ms. Rosen, no. Mr. Peters, no. Mr. Kelly, no. Mr. King, no. Mr. Blumenthal, no. Mr. Ossoff, no. Mrs. Murray, no. Mr. Sanders, no. Mr. Warner, no. Mrs. Gillibrand, no. Mr. Durbin, no. Mr. Cruz, aye. Ms. Baldwin, no. Mr. Murphy, no. Mr. Schumer, no. Ms. Klobuchar, no. Ms. Hassan, no. Mrs. Shaheen, Mrs. Shaheen, no. Mr. Whitehouse, Mr. Whitehouse, no. Mr. Markey, no. Mr. Schatz, no.
On this vote, the yeas are 51, the nays are 46, and the motion is agreed to. The clerk will report the nomination.
The judiciary, Eric Chun-Yi Tung of California to be United States Circuit Judge for the Ninth Circuit.
Mr. President, I move to proceed to legislative session.
Majority Leader,
I move to proceed to legislative session.
questions on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Ayes appear to have it. Ayes do have it. The motion is agreed to.
Mr. President, I move to proceed to executive session to consider executive calendar number 421.
Questions on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Ayes appear to have it. Ayes do have it. Motion is agreed to. Clerk will report the nomination.
Nomination, Department of State, Caleb Orr of Texas to be an Assistant Secretary.
Mr. President, I send a cloture motion to the desk.
Clerk will report.
Cloture motion, we, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a closed debate on the nomination of Caleb Orr of Texas to be an Assistant Secretary of State, Economic and Business Affairs, signed by 17 senators as follows.
Mr. President, I ask consent that reading the names be waived.
Without objection.
And I ask unanimous consent that the Senate resume legislative session and be in a period of morning business with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I have one request for a committee to meet during today's session of the Senate. It has the approval of the majority and minority leaders.
Duly noted.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate completes its business today, it stand adjourned until 10 a.m. on Tuesday, November the 4th, following the prayer and pledge. The journal proceedings be approved to date, the morning hour be deemed expired, the time for the two leaders be reserved for their use later in the day, and the Senate be in a period of morning business with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each, and the cloture motion with respect to calendar number 168, H.R. 5371, ripened at 11:30 a.m. Further, that the Senate recess from 12:30 to 2:15 p.m. to allow for the weekly conference meetings, and at 2:15 p.m. the Senate execute the order of October 30th in relation to the confirmation of the Dunlop nomination.
Without objection.
Mr. President, if there is no further business to come before the Senate, I ask that it stand adjourned under the previous order following the remarks of Senator Merkley.
Without objection.
Mr. President,
Senator from Oregon.
I ask unanimous consent to grant floor privileges to my interns on their shadow days, Flora Shaw on November 5th, 2025, Nida Nair on November 20th, 2025, and Maxwell Robin on December 4th, 2025.
Without objection.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. President Trump has developed a new MAHA strategy. Instead of Make America Healthy Again, his new strategy is Make America Hungry Agenda. He is weaponizing food against America's most vulnerable families. In my state of Oregon, that means cutting off food to 757,000 people, including 210,000 children and 130,000 seniors. Now, when you think about these numbers, they're hard to envision, but you know, Oregon is roughly 300 miles from the northern border to the southern border. I-5 runs the entire length of the state. So if all of those individuals were lined up on the highway, they would be just 2 feet apart for 300 miles. And every third person, approximately, would be a child. That's the level of impact that we are talking about. You know, when children go without food, the impact is pretty significant. There's the impact on their physical development. There's the impact on their mental development. And of course, if you're hungry, you can't learn a damn thing in school. So 3 ways of really hurting America's children, millions of American children. And Congress together, Democrats and Republicans, said this should never happen. The House and the Senate together said this should never happen. So together we created 2 tools. The first tool is a SNAP contingency fund, meant to ensure that families can keep putting food on the table. And the second tool is interchange authority that allows the Secretary of Agriculture to use tariff funds to supplement the contingency fund. Back in September, USDA's, U.S. Department of Agriculture's website, noted that it planned to use the contingency funds in order to make sure that SNAP was delivered in November. But then in October, last month, it deleted that language, and the president said, "My hands are tied. America's most vulnerable families must go hungry." Well, now, we know that the administration certainly was well aware of the contingency fund because it was on their website. And we know that the Department of Agriculture is well aware of its ability to use the interchange to transfer funds from a program that would enable it to provide the full SNAP benefits in the month of November. In fact, it's just used this interchange recently in both October and November for the WIC program. Right now, Section 32 funds, there's $23 billion in there. So just 1/5 of those funds would enable the full November SNAP funds to be distributed. Last week, I saw a speech by Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, on television. And he was saying that Republicans are not going to provide SNAP funds because it would reduce pressure on Democrats to reopen the government. In other words, Mr. President, the Speaker of the House was saying that America's families, most vulnerable families, the health and welfare of the children, the seniors, most vulnerable adults, that they're just bargaining chips. Well, let me tell you, our vulnerable families are not bargaining chips. Basic food for children is not a bargaining chip. So we're here to say, hell no. It is not acceptable to use children and the most vulnerable as bargaining chips. That's why 25 states and the District of Columbia filed a suit to the U.S. Department of Agriculture to say that it's illegal to stop funding SNAP. And on Friday of last week, 2 judges agreed in 2 different jurisdictions, in Massachusetts and in Rhode Island, and they said to the Trump administration, you must proceed to fund SNAP. The contingency fund is there for that purpose, and you have other funds to enable through the interchange to provide the full amount in November. Both are needed because there's about $4.65 billion, we're told, left in the contingency fund, but SNAP in a single month can be $8 to $9 billion. So that second tool is essential. And again, there's $23 billion in there waiting to be used. So there is absolutely no reason not to fund the full SNAP benefits for the month of November. But then the administration responded to the court, and they said, we're not going to do it. We'll use the contingency funds, but we're not going to use the interchange authority. We choose not to fund the full benefits for November. Well, this results in 2 problems. The first is that instead of about $6 a day, which is the standard average SNAP benefit, it'll be about $3 a day. Well, $3 a day isn't very much to feed any member of a family. But there's a second problem that's even worse. And this problem is that the U.S. Department of Agriculture said in a court document filed today, and I have it right here, ask unanimous consent that this court document may be part of the official record, Mr. President. Thank you so much. This court document was filed today by Patrick Penn. He is the Deputy Undersecretary for Food, Nutrition, and Consumer Services at the Department of Agriculture. And he says, quote, USDA's understanding is that the system changes states must implement to provide the reduced benefit amounts will take from a few weeks to up to several months. So here's the situation. The court said, fund SNAP and do it right away. Today, the administration filed this document saying it will take weeks to months because they're choosing to fund only half and everything has to be reprogrammed in the computer system to make that happen at the federal level and for most states. That is not an acceptable strategy. That's going back to saying people are not going to get SNAP benefits in November. You know, this resolution that I have tonight, it's very simple and expresses a number of thoughts that I've heard from both sides of the aisle. It is the sense of the Senate that the Trump administration is obligated to fund SNAP through the use of the contingency fund. And the courts have made that very clear. Second, the administration has the authority in the funds to finance SNAP through the month of November, which we know because they have both the contingency fund and they have the interchange fund. And third, exercising this power is extremely important to the health and wellness of families experiencing hunger, including about 16 million children, 8 million seniors, 4 million people with disabilities, and about 1.2 million veterans. And finally, the administration should exercise its legal authority to fund SNAP in November. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Mr. President, children, seniors, the disabled, the veterans, our most vulnerable family, they are not bargaining chips. It is simply wrong to treat them as bargaining chips. It's wrong to adopt a position in which they will not even get funded in November after the courts have said, fund it. There is enormous damage that is done when children are deprived of food, to their health, to their mental development, to their physical development, to their ability to learn in school. And of course, there's damage done mentally and physically to all of the adults who are funded in this program. Food deprivation is not a correct strategy for any government in the United States of America. Trump's Make America Hungry Again agenda is wrong. It is immoral. There's just something that really seems like the United States is way off kilter when we have a president who's absolutely passionately excited about building a giant golden ballroom worthy of Louis XIV to feast, to dine and dance with billionaires and power brokers of the world, while letting, and in fact forcing, America's children and vulnerable families to go hungry. I thank Senator Schumer and the other 44 or other additional 44 co-sponsors who have joined this resolution. I invited all 100 senators to join it. The 5 points are certainly ones that I've heard expressed on both sides of the aisle. Let's all together say fund SNAP, not weeks or months from now, but right now, so America's families in every state, regardless of how they're represented in this chamber, will benefit. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to immediate consideration of my resolution, which is at the desk. Further, the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, and that the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
Majority Whip.
Mr. President, reserving the right to object. This isn't lawmaking. This is a political stunt by the Democrats. The resolution they're offering is empty. It is meaningless. Democrats shut down this government. Democrats have voted against reopening the government 13 times. Democrats are holding food assistance for 42 million Americans hostage, and they're going to do it again tomorrow. They're doing it tonight. Democrats knew their actions threatened food assistance. They were fully aware of it. This was organized and orchestrated in Chuck Schumer's office months in advance of the shutdown. The Department of Agriculture warned the Democrats weeks ago what was going to happen. So did local newspapers around the country. As a matter of fact, a newspaper in the senator's home state of Oregon reported, quote, "Food is the first thing to go." The Oregon paper went on to say, Oregonians brace for SNAP delays if federal shutdown drags on. And still, for 34 days, Democrats have voted time and time again to keep the government closed. Democrats hadn't voted 13 times to shut down the government, there wouldn't be these lines that we're seeing on television down and around the block at food banks all around the country. The senator from Oregon just talked about using children, using people as pawns, as political pawns. Well, that's exactly what the Democrat whip in the House had said. So, of course, there's going to be suffering. So it gives them leverage. Senators in this body, Democrats, have said exactly the same thing. The Democrats have continued to use people as pawns for political purposes, and it's wrong. It has to stop. If Democrats really wanted to help struggling families, they'd stop blocking a clean continuing resolution. The shutdown ends when Democrats end their dangerous political games. And it is a dangerous political game, and even the Washington Post has pointed that out. Want to end the food assistance cliff? It's easy. Pass the clean bipartisan continuing resolution. Democrats should vote for it immediately. Until then, Mr. President, the Schumer shutdown is going to continue to hurt struggling families. Therefore, Mr. President, I object.
The objection is heard.
Mr. President,
Senator from Oregon.
I had really hoped that given the 5 basic planks of this resolution, which have been expressed on both sides of the aisle, that we could have something other than arguments that sound like, I don't know, moldy bread, stale cheese, arguments we've heard time and time again about a shutdown. But you know, my resolution and my remarks tonight didn't even mention a shutdown. And why is that? Because the shutdown is irrelevant as to whether or not the November SNAP payments are made. We have a contingency fund for that purpose. We created, Democrats and Republicans together, interchange authority for that purpose. There are more than $23 billion sitting in that interchange fund, Section 32, tariff funded. The money is there. The legal authority is there. And this resolution simply says that failing to provide SNAP benefits hurts millions of people and encourages the president to do what the courts asked him to do, told him to do last Friday, to provide the funds. But the administration sneered at the court. They said, we're going to adopt a strategy in which the funds may not get to people for weeks or months, because we're going to do it in a fashion that requires a reprogramming of computers across America. Really? There's only one desk that has the power to immediately make these funds available, and that's the desk in the Oval Office. Shouldn't we, representing the people in each of our states, come together in a bipartisan fashion to say that depriving people of food, the most vulnerable families of food across America, is simply wrong? Mr. President, and I'm speaking to Mr. President Trump, President Trump, you have the authority, you have the funds, you have the responsibility. Make America Hungry agenda, your agenda of starving children and vulnerable families, is wrong. Surely, that's something both Democrats and Republicans can agree on. Let's keep pressing for the president to get those funds to America's vulnerable families immediately. Thank you, Mr. President.
Under the previous order, the Senate stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow.